I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the National Center on Nonprofit Enterprise, and I guess also on behalf of the Mandel School, since I'm affiliated with that as well as an emeritus professor. Um, as you know, the purpose of this program is really to try to help prepare nonprofit leaders for this new age in which we seem to be engaged, an age of crises and crises management and a lot of uncertainty in the environment. Um, the 100-year events that seem to come every year now, whether it be a recession or a storm or a pandemic or even an internal crisis. The idea of this program is that we really need to take another look at how we approach the management of nonprofit organizations. Not so much to be uh, so focused on narrow issues of performance that we neglect the viability and the resilience of the organization. So we think that we really need to look at the management of nonprofits in a new way, and this whole program is designed around that concept. Um, we have, beginning with Elizabeth, I think put together a great faculty of folks from all around the country, different universities that study nonprofit organizations, and they are going to lead each of the 10 modules that we have that are scheduled, and I hope you can participate in as many of those as you can. We are indebted to some of the funders that have allowed us to get this started with some upfront capital, so to speak, particularly Dick Pogue, who is an emeritus partner in the law firm Jones Day. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard of that very important firm that's headquartered here in Cleveland. But Dick has been just very generous and critical in terms of giving us some upfront funds that we could work with, as well as several members of the board of the National Center of Nonprofit Enterprise. Also a shout out, and hopefully he'll join us at some point, to Rob Fisher, who will be giving one of our uh, one of our modules, faculty member and leader of the nonprofit program at the Mandel School at Case Western Reserve. We are using the Mandel School's platform here, and Rob has been a particularly important member of the team to put this program together. We've had great staff work from our executive director, Stuart Mandel, who is here with us, and Eric Vokes, a consultant that may be able to join us. So, let's get started. I mean, we're very enthusiastic about kicking this off, and we thank you for being the first. I see we've been joined by Roland Kushner, who is one of our presenters later in the program. Roland is at Muhlenberg College in Pennsylvania, and he'll be talking about balance sheet um, resilience later on. I don't have the exact date in front of me, but you have it on the poster. So really pleased to kick this off with Elizabeth Searing leading the way. She's really done some important scholarship over the last few years on what I would now call resilience, but the whole field of both the ecology and the economics of nonprofit organizations, and how they thrive, how they grow, how they run into trouble and need to be addressed in various ways. So I've known Elizabeth since her graduate days. For better or for, I think it's not a dubious distinction that she was my PhD student, and that was an honor for me. And she has been a faculty member at the University at Albany in New York, and recently has moved to the University of Texas at Dallas, where I think she's closer to her native roots. And I'm sure they miss her in Albany already. but Elizabeth and I have conspired on a number of things recently, including a book you may have run into called The Social Enterprise Zoo. And we're continuing to look at the operations and development of I would call social purpose organizations. Just the core of that is nonprofit, but taking into account all of these new forms and trying to understand how they work as well and what it takes for them to survive and grow and be viable. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Elizabeth. I think she's got a great day planned for you, and I'm going to sit in as long as I possibly can. Elizabeth.
Thank you so much, Dennis. Yes, so welcome everyone on what for most of us is a morning, but for some of us is late evening to the very first module in a rich and I think informative series on nonprofit resilience. Thank you to the funders that Dennis just mentioned, and thank you to Dennis for inviting me on yet another of our really interesting projects dedicated to nonprofit resilience, nonprofit health, and building nonprofit capacity. I'm really encouraged by the group, listening to where everyone is from, and the fact that we've got some people with funding connections. So we've got, it sounded like Eric is getting into capacity building, and Jenna is actually formally part of the government, but works kind of serving the cultural sector. And honestly, that it adds another layer, I think, to what this session can produce at the end of the day, because many nonprofits, I think some of what we're going to be talking about today in terms of the importance of Slack and the ability to maneuver, these are important, but kind of in our core, we understand this. Where we need assistance actually is convincing other people outside of the sector, the funders, potential donors, that these are important concepts. And so the fact that some of us already have like a foot in one of those sandboxes is really encouraging. So love starting off my day with that. As Dennis mentioned, I'm Elizabeth Searing. I am at the University of Texas at Dallas right now. I've been here for 2 years. I was raised in Texas, but it took me 20 years to get back. So they've recovered in that time. I was before this, immediately prior, I was in upstate New York at the University at Albany. And before that, I was 13 years in Atlanta, Georgia. So I'm from a lot of different places, I guess, but back in Texas now. While I was in Albany, I also ran an institute that was designed to match the needs of the community with the abilities of local universities. Plus, I just volunteered with a lot of local nonprofits, whether it's serving on boards or coordinating kind of service learning projects for students. So even though I am an academic, sometimes we get a really bad rap for being isolated and opining on things of which we have no practical knowledge. I've been an entrepreneur. I've been a volunteer. I've worked for nonprofits. I don't know your experience, but I do have experience of my own. So yes, I am an academic right now, but do not hold that against me. So the purpose today is kind of threefold. First, I want to introduce the concept of resilience. It's a very hot word right now. And like a lot of hot words and concepts, it means about a million things, depending on whose advertisement it is that you are looking at. And so I want to help you be able to give a definition that is useful to you in your line of work. The second is for you to be able to provide justification that you can give to managers, boards, funders about why things that we're talking about today, like Slack and agility, are important to you in order to provide service. And then finally, I'm also going to be kind of I'm going to say provide an appetizer platter for the rest of the module. So a lot of today, it's it's kind of an introduction to what we are going to be bringing forward in greater detail later. So we'll talk a lot about resiliency, but I want to be able to provide enough so that if you have a burning fascination to learn more about what that means in terms of technology or networks or the balance sheet, that you know to sign up for those courses, because we're just going to get a little bit of detail today, but there are sessions dedicated to resiliency in each one of these contexts that are coming up. And so I definitely want to do right by the experts that we have in the coming weeks. So just a couple, I guess, housekeeping bits. For most of this, I'm going to be, I guess, most of the next 2 hours or so, I will be sharing slides. So we'll still all be able to see each other and like the thumbnails, but we'll have something up on screen that we'll be going through. You won't have to look at me talk for the next few hours. But if you have something you need to do, you need coffee, that kind of thing, please feel free to take care of whatever business you need to. There will be breaks in the program, and I will go ahead and start sharing my screen now so that I can show you what I am talking about. Alrighty. And so this is our schedule for today. I will occasionally, if you hear me refer to what appears to be the wrong time, it's because right now I'm in Central and it sounds like most of you are in Eastern. So we're going to chat for about 2 hours and 15 minutes, and then we're going to have our first half-hour break. You can grab a sandwich, answer some emails. During that break, I'll be sending out some materials for your for a couple of the activities that we're going to be doing, the case study and your essentially after hours assignment that we'll do, that you'll be responsible for after today is concluded. Then when we come back from the lunch break, we're going to have a panel discussion where I have invited in some nonprofit leaders and a capacity builder to talk about what resiliency means to them, how they've been able to use it and put it to work, and how they wish that they could have used it kind of in retrospect. Then we'll have another break, and then we're going to do the case study. And it's that case study material that I'll be sending out during the first break. You don't need to, read it during the panel or anything. It's pretty short. It's just a couple pages. You can easily get it done during the break, and I definitely want you to pay attention to the really interesting panel. But I will get those to you during the first break via email. So if you don't get them, then please feel free to let me know. I also want to mention that when I am sharing my screen like this, I can only see a very few people in the thumbnails. So if you have a question, always feel free to stop at any time and just ask. So I know a lot of us, we've been on so many Zoom meetings that we have trained ourselves to use the little raise hand button. And so we're all still nice and polite. Because I'm sharing my screen, I'm not going to see your polite raise hand button. So do feel free to simply unmute and ask the question. It is totally okay to interrupt. And because I think that we are the size of group where we could get a really good discussion going if something piques your interest. And then we will totally wrap up by 4:30 today. So it is a sizable day, but it will be one that I think is broken up into pieces where we're doing different things. And so I am looking forward to this being a day well spent on the internet for all of us. So what we're going to be doing during this first part, it's more, I would say, classroom learning just because I'm using a PowerPoint. And I know that feels kind of classroomy to some of us. So let me tell you kind of where we're going. So first, we're going to talk about why we're here. Then we're going to talk about what resiliency is. We're going to talk about the difference between preparing for crisis and managing crisis, because there are two different key concepts for each one of those. And then we're going to talk about the importance of what we're calling a portfolio approach. So really, why are we here? Well, it's not like running a nonprofit was ever easy. We're delivering programs, we're raising funds through any number of a dozen different ways. We're satisfying so many stakeholders while following so many rules. How many pennies out of every dollar are you spending on indirect costs? Everyone seems to have an opinion on that, even if those that are asking can't tell you exactly what an indirect cost is. But I think that the last few years have really turned up something really special for those of us in the nonprofit sector. Whether it seems like the more that we try, the more we find ways to cause even more need. So the refugee crisis, the economic crisis in Venezuela, the Flint, Michigan water catastrophe, the violence in Myanmar, climate change, and then boom. Then we got kind of what at first seemed like the one crisis that changed absolutely everything. But it kind of makes you think of all of the pivoting that we have done over the last 18 months. Is it really just this one time that we've had to be this creative? Is this surely isn't the one time where you've had to call your board together or your management staff and said, okay, this has happened and we really need to think about how we're going to handle this situation. And I think that even though the COVID pandemic is certainly something that is exceptional, it isn't the first time that we have all had to address crisis. It's not the first time that we as nonprofits have had to struggle with resiliency. A report just by a scholar named Brown and her co-authors in 2013 actually found that 5% of nonprofits with 50 grand or more in annual revenue closed during the 2008 to 2012 period. So if anyone remembers that recession, now that we've been through COVID, that's about a full 1% higher than closures in the previous 4-year period. And about 1 out of every 10 of nonprofits in that period dipped below the 50K reporting threshold for the IRS. Compared to 8% in the previous period. So it's not that this may be the biggest time, but it's definitely not the first time that we have faced a situation where we have needed to be resilient. But I do think that it has given us the opportunity for the rest of society to start thinking about us and our sector and our organizations and resilience. So I'm just one of a team of instructors that have gathered to talk to you about resilience through these modules. And the tools that you are going to leave these modules with can be used really regardless of the situation. So this isn't, COVID may have brought us here, but this is not going to be a COVID focused training program. Now, are some situations going to require more pivoting than others? Yes, probably. Are we all totally sick of the word pivot? Yes, probably. But the tactics, I think, themselves are very much the same. So why do you do this? Why do you show up every day at your nonprofit related job? Whether it's because you're a staff or a board member or a capacity builder or a volunteer. I really am curious. For me, you can see kind of off to the side my own family's why. We have a big event coming up in North Texas in a couple weeks here called North Texas Giving Day, where it's kind of a regional giving day, but one that's wildly successful. And one of the extremely nifty practices that they have is that they will send you an email reminding you of the giving that you made the year before. And so this is actually from that email, reminding me of the places that my family, and I allow everyone, everyone in the family, kids, adults, whatever, donates to a different cause. So our why for 2020, you can see we care a lot about dogs. We care a lot about wildlife, and we care about family and community empowerment. And so I think that's part of the family's why, according to the North Texas Giving Day. But as far as my own personal why, I think that kind of goes back to my own narrative. Why do I do this? Well, because I have spent time as an entrepreneur, and I have, spent time where, there were periods of life that weren't as fabulous as others. And so I want to be able to take my knowledge and my degree and network and be able to give back, help others, keep them from having to go through some of my own experiences. And I think that being able to reach inside and touch that is key to me personally being able to move forward through the road bumps that I encounter kind of on a day-to-day basis. So I think that there are a lot of reasons why, possibly. I've heard, because we should, because we care, because it's our job. Like, I'm paid to show up at a nonprofit, like I'm paid to show up at McDonald's. So that's why I show up. Because we can, because others won't, because it makes a difference. I think I've heard probably all of these, and they're not really mutually exclusive. But I'm curious, what is your why? And I'm going to unshare real quick, so that I can actually call on people and we can have a discussion. So what is your why? Why do you do what it is that you do rather than doing something else? Any volunteers?
Oh, I could go first.
Let's do it.
I'll be real quick and then yield the floor to Jenna. So it just that it's so difficult to accomplish anything if you're following bureaucracy or you're in a business which has a profit motive. There's really very limited ability to pivot, as you say, to have an impact beyond what the transactions that you're doing. So for me, working in the nonprofit sector is the most rewarding place to be, and caring about it is it's kind of like your list of organizations that you follow, Elizabeth. It's a way to leave a footprint beyond just punching a time clock. I don't know if others share that, but simple.
Oh, thank you, Stuart. Jenna?
Thanks. So I work for local government now, but I have worked in the nonprofit sector quite a bit. And it's funny because I go back and forth, because in a government operation, you don't have to worry about keeping the lights on. But you do have the bureaucracy issues that he was talking about. In the nonprofit, in arts nonprofits, you do have to make money. It's a big misconception in the world that we don't have to make money. We do. But in the arts, there are very few for-profit operations that would make sense for anybody who really is passionate about promoting arts and culture in the world. They tend to be entertainment operations or venues, with some exceptions like small dance studios or something like that. So one reason is that the nonprofit world is really the only opportunity in most of the arts to work. And the great thing is that you have a lot of artistic freedom. Sometimes you'll have issues with your board, but usually they get on board because they know what the mission of the organization is. So if you want to do something that is creatively important, but might only bring in an audience of 75, as long as you can keep the lights on, you can do that. And also, as Stuart said, small nonprofits can pivot much more quickly and make adjustments much more quickly than larger organizations. And so it's a great pleasure to work in them, except that I've always been the managing director or executive director. And it's actually quite hard to run a nonprofit because the finances are always so tenuous. And I've taken jobs and interviewed for jobs where it's clear that board members don't understand that it's called development for a reason. You can't just wave your magic development wand and suddenly there's $500,000 in the bank. So,
and I encountered that quite a bit as well from people who have started in the state and come over to the nonprofit sector, because a lot of universities, the nonprofit program is actually located in the public administration school. So we will have students come back and forth between government classes and nonprofit classes. And it's because we're all providing, these public goods. But it's just, it stumps the people who hadn't thought about it before that, well, how can you do X if you can't compel taxes? And the rest of us that have nonprofit experience are like, why, yes, it is difficult. Roland, were you going to share your why?
Sure. I've enjoyed nonprofit work since I was a teenager, and I just found it to be more fun professionally and personally. And the engagement has been very diverse, certainly as a volunteer, but for a good part of my career as an arts administrator, heading big festival organizations, radio stations, choral, doing development work for choral music organizations. And then subsequently as a consultant to local, regional, and national, and occasionally global. The questions that I could answer for nonprofits were more compelling to me than the questions I could answer for businesses. Now I'm a business professor, and that's certainly core to what I do professionally. But I continue to have the affinity for nonprofits in my volunteer work on nonprofits. One in particular, it's a street level human service organization, and we feed people who are indigent, and we house people who are basically indigent. So our financial planning questions start with, okay, how are we going to lose money today? And to be able to say that and not have to hesitate about it. So I like the nonprofit sector for all those reasons, and I find it to be so entrepreneurial. There's so much vision and imagination and accomplishment that people have done across the sectors. I look particularly at arts, but now human service, environmental, obviously, and social justice and advocacy frameworks as well. So it's exciting.
Thank you, Ron. Jesse, do you have your? Yeah, sure.
So I come at this from a completely different place than a lot of you. I'm the program director at our local JCC. I started out because they needed a preschool teacher and I moved to the area and didn't have a job yet. And that was 10 years ago. And now I'm the program director. So I kind of came into this because I had a community that engulfed me when I first moved in. And now I work to give back to that community. I think part of my why is that no 2 days ever look the same. I'm always working on something different. I'm always working with a different group of people, different ages. And that's part of what I love. It's always a challenge. I can always be creative. I will tell you, and my staff knows, I am stupid when it comes to numbers. I can follow a budget. I can know how to be frugal, but when it comes to numbers and a lot of the stuff, it's going to be me looking at you like have no clue.
I hear that so much. I actually teach the numbers courses. My research is on the nonprofit financial side. Everyone walks into my class saying those kinds of things. I assure you, you are fully capable. So don't be intimidated. Always ask questions.
Until then, I've learned to make the accountant my best friend, and we're good to go.
Me
And
too.
They walk out of Elizabeth's classes not saying that anymore, I must say.
Not everyone loves it, but some do. So and everyone knows how to read it and produce the reports. So that's the good thing. So, well, thank you, Jesse. Does anyone else want to talk about their why?
I'll jump in and talk about my why here a little bit.
Thanks, Eric.
Apologies, no video. My system is not recognizing my camera for some reason, and it's a laptop, so I don't get Zoom's not recognizing my laptop's camera. Anyways, that being said, so a couple of things come to mind as it relates to my why. First, I am a first-generation Dominican Peruvian from New York City, and that many moons ago, the organization that took me in and supported me and allowed me to become who I am to a large degree was a small nonprofit that was focused on the Dominican community, which Washington Heights, New York City. It's predominantly, that's where they came from. They were immigrating from. So I saw the demise of that organization, and when I remember graduating college, and I first got into child welfare, helping seniors, helping children, all these things. And I landed in nonprofits, and I promised myself that I would try to understand why so many nonprofits that are focused on communities of color don't have the same connections that their counterparts do. And so I've been focused on that for some time. I worked in a lot of nonprofits. I have over 20 years experience working in what some people would label corporate nonprofits and others. And I did some mergers and acquisitions there where, we were taking over smaller nonprofits that just were not in a good place financially. And then I've transitioned over to Unidos US, the largest Latino civil rights organization that has a network of over 300 nonprofits. Almost 300 nonprofits. And I was helping about 70 of those establish fee-for-service, social enterprise type initiatives around in housing and small business development and things of that nature. So through all of this, I've just had a lot of learnings as to kind of the why of a lot of things. And there's a couple of things that drew me about this. So one is the financial aspect, right? So many nonprofits have a hard time connecting strategy with organizational development, their financials, and what does it mean? So I spend a lot of time helping organizations establish financial modeling from the service perspective. So we could create 4 or 5. If they have 4 or 5 main services, we'll try to create financial modeling for them around those and help them understand the importance of the nonprofit being, you're in a business, you're just in a business to help people, which is even more complex in many respects than your private entities that are just in a business of helping shareholders, right? So we're responsive to multiple stakeholders. And so we have to understand what our value proposition is to each one, and help each one understand the role that they can play on many fronts, both financially and in terms of support, just in-kind support, to help the organization run properly. And so helping organizations understand their value proposition and the impact they're having on the community, both socially and financially, is important. And painting that picture and creating financial models that help extract that value so that they can continue their work well beyond just tomorrow is of importance to me, and has been my my passion for, God, probably the last 10 years at least.
Thank you, Eric. And so much of what you just said, it was almost a microcosm of where we are going today in terms of, there's the part of it is going, there's a large financial element to resiliency, but it is definitely not exclusively financial. There are other considerations in there, human resources, innovation, technology. There's more to it than that, and all of it has a tendency to be, I want to say misunderstood, but it can be, people build it up to be so intimidating that having the time to sit down, think through the revenue models, get your logic model put together. It's something that is not technically difficult, but when we are wrapped up in the day-to-day of providing services, it can be really difficult to convince ourselves to take that afternoon and sit down and put together a well-articulated theory of change. And so being able to work with capacity builders, like it sounds like you serve as, is a solid value add to the community, and is kind of the approach that that a lot of these modules are taking. Everyone in this room is fully capable of making a strong stand for nonprofit resiliency. We are simply here to equip you with additional knowledge and language and tools in order to make that happen. So so very, very happy to hear your why, because it resonates very, very well with kind of the mission of the training series itself. So does anyone else want to talk about their why? Okay. So why are we talking about why? It's did we get April back? April, did you want to talk?
I can, sure. So for me, I had cancer as a kid, and my family was supported by a lot of nonprofits. And at the time, I thought I wanted to be a doctor. And then I got to college and discovered I hated chemistry and biology. So not really a great fit there. So I started going the route of nonprofits, and my place in the nonprofit world has shifted. I spent a lot of time in programs, and I'm now on the HR side and coming at it as an HR consultant supporting nonprofits. But for me, it started as a way to give back to the community that supported me. And it sort of evolved into, I have seen so much that needs to be fixed in so many different ways. And so now I'm working to help build organizations that are working on how to fix these problems. So it became more of a, how should I better use my skills to support this community, because doing wasn't doing it for me anymore. I spent 20 years in programs and said, there's a brick wall and I have hit it. And so coming at it from this sort of consulting perspective has really renewed my enthusiasm for the nonprofit sector.
Thank you. And I think that leads us really well into the why are we talking about individual motivation right now? Like we're here to talk about nonprofit resiliency. Why are we telling our personal narratives? And I think it's because it's key, because when we face organizational crises as managers, we're still people facing those organizational crises. If anything, the desire to go to day trade or something, if that's your game. Maybe it's stronger even during a crisis, because you can feel overwhelmed. But thinking about that why, the why is where we always come back to when we find these kinds of crises. So if we talk any conversation about resiliency, and there are going to be all of these tools and all of this language and all of these strategies, and those are kind of on the ground, assembled around you as you get ready to make your defense. But the core, the wall behind you that you can provide, get support from, that is the why. And so you have a core of support on a personal level that keeps you going. But then there's also this core of support on an organizational level, and that's your mission. So many nonprofits, and we'll talk about some of these studies later, when things really get tough, there are a lot of more formal kind of management strategies that you can put into place, both in terms of preparing for the crisis and in terms of reacting to the crisis. But one of those ways that kind of runs throughout is really remembering why you're there, whether that's just something where it's a rallying cry, or whether it's just something that you need to check in with once a day and think about it. So there's a reason that you opted into the nonprofit sector, and there's a reason that nonprofit exists, and that is that why is at the core of all of the tools that we're going to be using today. So it's key to kind of keep that in mind. And it doesn't matter whether it's, there's an outward manifestation of this in terms of, I remember when my family worked in hospitals when I was growing up. And one of the keys to accreditation was that when the auditors were on site, they could stop any person. That person needed to be able to recite the mission statement for the hospital. And so the key was that everyone took their little name badge, which is always huge when you're in a hospital. And on the flip side of it, they would stuff the mission statement. It was like little and printed out. And so that way they could just go, and the auditor could check it off, and everyone was totally fine. Now, that was kind of compulsory. But honestly, I know people, and I have encouraged people to, if that works for you, carry that mission statement with you. If you really believe that, if you firmly believe in your mission, and you feel that it would do you good by having the mission statement printed somewhere, and in somewhere where you could access it, feel free. If someone else, if it's not their style, then it's not their style. But the mission statement plays a central role in providing this kind of backbone for crisis. So the why never stops being important. Okay, so Jesse says that Apple used to do the same thing back in the day. Yeah, and maybe not even back in the day. This still sounds like a Genius Bar kind of thing. So yeah, so I do recommend, and I don't know if I have the mission statement of many of the nonprofits out, but if you could see around my office, I do have visual tokens of organizations that I have worked with and people that I have worked with to provide reminders on the not so fabulous days of my why, and that drives me forward. So I am going to
Elizabeth, if I could just make a follow-on comment. Sure. I think this discussion also points out why it's so important to examine this issue of resilience in the nonprofit sector. I mean, all kinds of organizations, of businesses, government, everybody's worried about resilience, but think about what's lost if we lose a nonprofit. I mean, sure, in the for-profit sector, we all have our favorite stores, coffee shops, restaurants, movie theaters. Those are all important in a way, but the fact that we've got such important institutions in the nonprofit sector, it's different if we if we lose a local hospital or a local college or a homeless shelter or a symphony hall or well a museum, and those things are so integral to our lives that the issue of resilience is that much more important. And I think that's part of, in terms of personal motivation, I think that's part of what has motivated me in this quest to sort of help nonprofits become more resilient, become better managed, and so forth.
Well, thank you, Dennis. I agree. And if we don't mind getting a little bit dark for a moment, one of my research specialties is actually nonprofit closure and demise. And even the process of nonprofit closure is more smooth with a strong network. And we'll talk a little bit about the resilience that you can find in networks and in collaborations. And so when you are facing closure, like some of the really large human services organizations in New York, like BEGS, that when you have that size of a hole in the service provision, then the rest of your network is going to end up absorbing some of what you were trying to provide. And so even the worst case scenario of your own nonprofit closing, the people that you care for will be better served by you spending time building a resilient network before that happens. So there's it's the argument, I think, for building resilient not only organizations but systems, I think is everywhere.
Well, and I mean, I don't want to stretch this out too much because you've got a lot to say, but another part of this is the fact that many nonprofits have been extremely creative in being able to address unusual circumstances for which they have not been prepared. And we're as educators really taking inspiration from that. It's not as if that we are inventing ways to manage and develop resilience, out of the air. I mean, we're watching what's going on and actually just simply inspired by what many nonprofits have been able to do in a crisis, and feeling that knowledge needs to be systematized and needs to be shared widely so that all nonprofits can become more resilient.
Well, so my next slide actually is simply, what is resilience? So I'm going to pause before going back to the slide presentation, because I really am curious. Resilience is such a hot term right now that it appears to mean almost anything. So I'm curious, when I say the word resilience, and when you signed up for this before you looked at all of the rest of the materials, what does resilience mean to you when you hear it?
The ability to weather events that could destabilize an organization and cause it to either shrink in its footprint or close entirely as a result of not having redundancy.
Good. And I think that's important, because it's not only about closure, but it's about shrinking as well. So I like that distinction. We just had something in the chat, but it's
Ability to withstand crises from Jenna.
thank you, Jenna. So we've got some verbs going here: withstanding, surviving, not shrinking. Anne has contributed that it also involves preparedness. Yes, absolutely. We'll be talking about the kind of two different phases: preparation and response. Anyone else?
Well,
Dennis, I saw you unmuted.
well, you'll appreciate this in particular, but resilience is a positive thing. It's not just warding off terrible, terrible situations, but it's maintaining a position so that one can continue to do one's mission and to grow it in that. You can't do that unless you're resilient and you're able to look forward rather than simply, crouch in a defensive position.
Thanks. And I think that's something that is also kind of often overlooked. We tend to think about resilience. I mean, the reason it's a hot term now is because of COVID and the massive upheaval that we've been through. But resilience doesn't, it's not really a bad thing. Like, we tend to talk about it during stressful times, but it itself is a good thing. It's a positive thing. It's just a positive thing we only tend to talk about during not so positive situations.
Yep.
So hopefully through practices like what we're talking about today, normalizing resilience will happen through things like preparation, building up slack, and things, so that it won't take a crisis for us to talk about the importance of having a resilient nonprofit.
Right, Elizabeth, if I could just pitch in a little bit here. So
Sure.
I guess I look at it somewhere in between what you and Dennis have just said. To me, it has to do with nimbleness and the ability to flex and change and adapt and be enduring. If an organization is too fixed, and how can it be if its funding isn't a particular way, or if its third party stakeholders have different missions than you do? And so in my mind, I've always loved the bridge metaphor, Dennis. And I like that concept, that what that means is being that connector. So that means understanding both ends of the bridge, and if adapting, and just think of all the complexity. And Jen, I'd be kind of curious on how you viewed this too, but trying to persuade a board member to look at things through a different lens than they're maybe skilled at or used to, and then having them agree and then want to pitch in with support. And that requires real nimbleness, real flexibility. At the same time, having some kind of allegiance to the mission and using it as a guide. So I also don't hear that in the resilience discourse. So.
I agree, Stuart. And so let me start sharing again. And we are going to talk a little bit about what the definition of resilience is up to this point, because it has been it has been the subject of fascination before, but each, I would say, group of people have had kind of their own angle on what resilience is. And so understanding where it's been, I think, will be really informative on where we should try and push it today. So first, really the first movers, like on the academic side, when we started talking about nonprofit resiliency and its kind of counterpart, nonprofit vulnerability, a lot of that work was infused by the business literature, by people that studied business, particularly, I think, individuals who worked with accounting ratios, financial factors such as what's on your balance sheet, what is your revenue, where are your expenses going. These kinds of financial factors had been used by for-profit researchers to try and predict which businesses were going to go bankrupt. And on the for-profit side, it's pretty easy. You predict bankruptcy, there's a list of bankruptcies. And so these really, really complicated models emerged in the middle of the 20th century about how to accurately predict when a for-profit company was going to go bankrupt. And so in the early 90s, nonprofit researchers started trying to do something similar for the nonprofit sector. And they encountered a couple problems. The biggest one of which was that nonprofits can technically declare bankruptcy, but not a whole lot of us do. And especially in the US, the IRS wasn't really on top of the registrations as far as kicking people out for not filing for a very long time. We didn't have an updated list of who actually was still a tax exempt nonprofit. And so researchers that were trying to put together this really kind of clean ability to predict that all of the business researchers had put together really struggled because they didn't have essentially something to predict. So they came up with this definition of financial vulnerability. And this started with these accounting ratios. And you'll see a lot of different studies on this slide and on some of the other ones. Feel free, if any of them are interesting to you, just hop over to Google Scholar and plug them in, and you should be able to pull up the information. If you are interested in any of the articles that either I talk about in depth or are just citations on the page, and you can't access them because of some kind of crazy journal paywall, please reach out to me. I have definite opinions on journal paywalls. And would be happy to help you access the article that you're interested in. Just email me directly. And so this is where the nonprofit study of at least vulnerability started. Then kind of over time, non-financial factors started to come in. So it's not just about the accounting ratios. Instead, it can be about non-financial things like mission drift. So if an organization has this kind of clear mission, and then they start adding things, or maybe we'll just go for this grant, even though it's not exactly what we do, and it starts to drift away, the dissonance that might cause with funders or with staff can cause organizations problems and can contribute to organizational closure, or things like staff conflict. So if you have, if the executive director and the CFO are always at each other and butting heads, then that can be problematic for the survival of the organization. I've personally done research looking at the different types of staff conflict. So if in the study that I did with mental health organizations in upstate New York, actually, if there was conflict with an entity outside of the organization, so that it was kind of an us versus them, especially if the them was either the state government, or downstate, because in New York, and Eric, you might hear me on this, there is a big difference if you live in upstate New York about upstate versus downstate. So if you could rally yourself against the downstate organizations, then that kind of conflict actually gave you a boost and contributed to your resiliency. But if there was fighting within the organization, then that was much more problematic and contributed to your vulnerability. So, but then there started to be kind of variations on this vulnerability idea. So there was the adoption of kind of this system thinking framework. And you'll see a lot of that through the modules that we talk about. So it's really, it's helpful to think only about your own organization when thinking about resilience. But we need to expand really to have a complete picture and to really contribute to the resiliency of both you within the network and the resiliency of the network itself. Also the importance of context. So not surprisingly, outside of the United States, things looked a little bit different in terms of what made nonprofits vulnerable than within the United States. And then there have just been more creative uses of those accounting ratios. So like I mentioned earlier, sometimes it feels like all we do is talk about money when we talk about resiliency and vulnerability. It's not true, but the money is there. So accounting ratios still are in pretty popular usage. But I still think, even as a contributor to these kinds of studies, that this is limited, because the focus on essentially not dying as the definition of resiliency is shallow. And already today, just in kind of what we've been walking in with, we know that resiliency is a little bit more than that. So let's talk about what the ecologists contributed to this. So with apologies to any ecologists in the audience, and it didn't sound like we had any, ecology sounds really complicated. So we're looking at the picture that we've got on the screen right now. There's like Greek letters, and that can be really off-putting. But think about it this way: who has heard of the wolves and the deer? Okay, so this was a math. I want to say this was a math project that I had when I was younger, where they illustrated essentially that the deer population. So if all of a sudden you're in an area that's got a deer population, and then that deer population goes up, then pretty soon, like not immediately, but soon enough, the wolf population is going to go up. And then when the wolf population goes up, the deer population is going to go back down. And so it's not like the wolves and the deer hang out. They're not having meetings and coordinating resiliency strategies. But the existence and interplay of those two populations influence the size of both groups. And so that's kind of, I would say, a simpler way of thinking about the contribution of ecology. So this chart essentially says something similar. This is called a Holling loop, based on the kind of biological ecological work of Holling in 1973, which emphasized things like complexity, what happens with a catastrophic external shock, and that it isn't just about continued survival. And that's where it kind of differentiates than where the nonprofit stuff started. It's not just about survival. It's also about continuing to function. So in this Holling loop, we'll walk through it, and then we're going to move on to something that I think is a little bit more straightforward. So we'll see up in the quadrant with the alpha. So we've got the alpha there that's blue, and it stands for reorganization, as you can see on the little tab. Reorganization, so there's rapid change. So some kind of destabilizing event happens. And so then we enter a period of rapid change. Everyone is scrambling. After that, I have to move around. All of your faces are there right on top of the on top of my Holling loop, so I can't see what's on the other side of it. So we have the K. Move you over. There we go. So we have the K, the kappa, which is conservation. So actually, let's not go that way. Let's start where the arrows are. So now that I can see the entire thing, let's actually start. So we've got the shock, and we have the exploitation, which is the new systems. and we're extracting resources. There are new institutions emerge, new political and social relationships happen. This moves into conservation, which is kind of a gradual construction of this new kind of stable state. Then this goes into release, so the capital is freed, and then we go back into reorganization. It's a loop. So basically we see ebbs and flows of different things happening. We have a shock, we have things break, then we have things stabilize, then we have people specialize, and then things break again. There's a much what I would consider simpler way of looking at this in the next slide, which is from the Journal of Rural Studies. And it answers the question, so what happens to small family farms during a crisis? And so I think this is much more useful than all of the Greek letters. So you have this, this shock happen. So let's look in we have the shock here in the upper right. We see shock. There is what is called the release of resources. You see the person saying, oh no, collapse, things, bad things are happening, there's creative destruction, but at the same time there is creative destruction, there is also this new opportunity. And this is kind of what Stuart was talking about, how there is this innovation. Bad things are happening, but new opportunities are happening as well. This causes new connections to happen. It causes people to try new things. Things are working, and now we are in a new growth phase that will then start over in where we see growing, adapting, and gathering resources. So
Elizabeth, if I could interrupt you, because this is fascinating to me anyway. So when the direction of the route, I guess the route is going down in terms of efficiency. And I'm going to guess that's efficiency the way it's currently considered, costs and outcomes and effective spending of dollars. So what this is suggesting to me is dollars are needed to create the connections, I guess. Is that what the diagram is?
Yes. And I think that that's a very, very succinct way of putting it. So efficiency is going to go down because in trying to build resiliency, and this is something that is going to be one of the main themes that we'll see today, building resiliency requires slack. And slack is not, according to a neoclassical economist, efficient. So we're not hitting the steady state equilibrium. Revenues are not equaling expenses. We need to build in slack. And so according to the most straightforward definition of efficiency, that means it is an inefficient concept, but it's one that helps us live longer because it increases our resiliency. So excellent point there. So getting out of the picture and moving our thumbnail back over to the side where it's generally out of the way, kind of. So let's go into what I would consider to be more the modern study of nonprofit resilience. And these are ones that are starting to get a lot more into actual management tactics. And notably, they're ones that are actually starting to use the word resilience instead of focusing on the dying. We're focusing on the continuing to be alive and continuing to function. Remember, we had started to get into nonprofits a little bit back in the business literature, but scholars such as myself, we seized on the idea back then that we could predict something that was kind of like bankruptcy, But we knew even then that that was only part of the story. So the literature has, academics have moved from studying how not to die towards studying how to live, which is important. Now, a lot of this is still going to be financy, but not all of it. Most of these studies now involve researchers getting out there and talking to people about what is going on, which sounds shocking, but there is a large portion of academic literature, and I say this as an academic that has contributed to that literature. There's a lot out there that just really works with the numbers, but it's not enough. And fortunately, there's more and more research being produced that is about these strategies that come from actually talking to people. So I'm going to go into depth on two of these studies that I think are particularly interesting. So the first is by a group called Mosley, Moronic, and Katz. This is a group of scholars that tested 5 different tactics used by human service nonprofits to survive that economic downturn back in 2007. They put together this study looking at nonprofits specifically in the San Francisco area, and they asked about specific strategies. They had 2, I would say, important limitations. The first is that their tactics were provided via a survey. So they essentially said, here are 5 ideas. Tell us what you think about these. And you can see those in the table off to the right. So they sent out the survey saying, okay, you hit hard times back during this reception. Of these 5 things, what did you do? And choose all that apply. And we see that actually a lot of organizations added additional programming during the recession, but some also discontinued programming. So some expanded, others added additional earned income, and others expanded advocacy. So in reading this, we're like, well, that's really interesting, but how are you? There's just so many questions. Like, so you added a new program and you discontinued a program potentially. Were they related programs? Did you have to branch out into something else entirely? Is there mission drift? Like, we've got so many questions. And so what happened is kind of a follow-up to this. Was a study that I was involved in with 2 other scholars that wanted to understand how nonprofits got through the Illinois budget impasse a couple years ago. So what happened there was the state of Illinois in 2015 through 2017 did not pass the state budget. So they signed contracts with nonprofits saying, you've got the contract, provide these services, we'll pay you. And the nonprofits had to provide services, but they did not get paid. And not only did they not get paid, they did not get paid, some of them, for 2.5 years. So they were obliged to do all the paperwork. They had to do all of the, the evaluation, all of that stuff, provide the services. But that reimbursement, that payment didn't come. And we were just stupefied. Like, how as a nonprofit are you providing, especially human services, without actually being paid? And so we put together a study where we talked to 31 different direct service organizations in human services, and then also umbrella nonprofits to try and understand how it was that they made, how did you make this magic happen? Seriously. So we conducted these interviews. We used their 990s. We looked at news articles. We looked at their annual reports. And this kind of gives the breakdown of some of the characteristics of some of the organizations that we talk to. Out of curiosity, when I say the word umbrella organization, what does that mean to you? Just shout it out because I can't see if anyone's got their hand raised. It is totally okay.
That's it's a larger organization, which could be a larger nonprofit, or it could be something like a college or a for-profit hospital that funds and starts a smaller nonprofit, usually to achieve a specific mission related to the overall organization. Here in Savannah, the Savannah Jazz Academy, which I think their umbrella organization is one of the universities. I've forgotten exactly. But that would be an example.
Yeah, good. It's a non-technical term, so there's definitely a lot of possibility in there. And so we specifically want it. So it's talking about, like you just mentioned, an organization that has an almost network management role, whether they are providing fiscal sponsorship or some kind of capacity building, or in our instance, they were industry organizations. So in many places, so for example, say that you are a domestic violence shelter, and there are other domestic violence shelters in nearby towns. Most of your day-to-day is spent on actually providing services to prevent or provide service to domestic violence victims. But you're aware of the fact that you need to be conducting advocacy, that you need to be making sure that your cause is on the minds of your elected officials, but you don't have the capacity to do that as a single organization. So instead, there will be another nonprofit, like you mentioned, that is a membership organization for these direct service providers that can take on a lot of these network level tasks, such as education, advocacy, and coordination. And so this is a map of the umbrella organizations that we worked with in this study, in addition to talking to the actual direct service providers. And the reason I point this out is because the role of networks in resiliency and the resiliency of those networks, I think is something that is often overlooked. So I want to be sure they've got kind of a continued presence in the conversation, and especially in terms of how these organizations got through this particular crisis. These networks and these umbrella organizations were actually quite crucial, and they vary quite a bit. So of the umbrella organizations that we worked with, we had two really big capacity builders that had, between 850 and 900 organizations that were members each. But there were also kind of single mission kind of coalitions that were umbrella groups, and they also played a very important role in getting organizations through. So this is what we found, and we called it the Resiliency Strategy Framework. If you wanted this article, this is available without a paywall. So we paid the money so that y'all didn't have to, so that it could be made accessible to people, where we talk about the different resiliency strategies that people offered up. So when we sat down and talked to people that were to managers in these nonprofits, we didn't say, pick from a list. We said, all right, tell us what you did in order to get through this crisis. And so then when it was all said and done, we looked at all of the different strategies everyone was using. We kind of categorized it. And that resulted in the framework that you're looking at, where you can see that, some of them were financial, like, selling things off. There was an organization that had to sell off a building. but there were also non-financial strategies, and quite a few, whether it was, trying to, because you couldn't pay staff, having to kind of get creative with incentives and recognition. So non-monetary staff rewards, parking spaces were big if you were in a city, or doing things like outreach, having to increase fundraising. For the program itself, there were often hard choices about whether or not to increase a wait list, or whether to, because you couldn't really expand capacity, whether to increase the wait list, decrease quality or the number of services, especially in human service provision. There are a lot of wraparound kind of things that you may not always get reimbursed for. Some of those went by the wayside, or things that were about leadership, what you could do as a manager in order to get the organization through this. And some of that was strategic action with partners like the business community, or just things like planning. And that's something that we're going to talk about a lot in terms of many of these strategies rely on your ability to prepare ahead of time. And so just like that kind of loop that we were talking about earlier, not as complicated, but there definitely is this cyclical component to being resilient. Preparation, response, and then preparation for kind of the next one. So, and just to give you another kind of, this is a different study that came out of the same group, looking at the not necessarily the individual kind of management strategies that people were using, but instead we looked at whether the nonprofits chose to keep fighting for money in the legislative arena. So whether or not they kept going to the state house and trying to influence their legislators, or whether they kind of cut bait on working with the legislator and moved it to the courts. So the type is kind of small here, but this is another decision where the umbrella groups actually had a really large role, because there wasn't a lot of movement organization by organization. So it wasn't that one nonprofit would decide to move to the courts. More often, it was a nonprofit that would be a part of the membership organization, and there would be an in-depth conversation within the membership organization about what the organization as a group, as a collective, should do. And that movement then could then be informed by the resources and advocacy and research of the umbrella organization. And so the ability to make this kind of strategic move in order to increase the resilience of the sector, that was something that was empowered and enabled by the creation of these networks before the crisis even happened. So no one really joined the membership organization thinking that they were going to need to lobby the state because they hadn't been paid in 2.5 years. But the fact that they had built these networks really helped move things forward when it came time to shift things over to the courts and try and press for money. So we've spent a lot of time in listening to what academics have been saying about what resiliency is. So let's leave the academic research behind a little bit and talk instead about what we mean today by resiliency, because I think that we're moving even beyond where academic researchers are talking. It's not just about survivability. It's not just about being able to continue, to breathing, to not die. It's about being able to withstand these conditions while also being able to deliver on services. And I would even push beyond that and say, beyond being able to deliver services today, but also into the future, because we, I think, are particularly incentivized to think about whom we are or are not feeding, serving today. Whereas what we should be thinking about is whom are we going to be able to serve now and into the future,
Right.
which can be a very hard conversation to have with boards. Stuart?
So, Elizabeth, what the example you just gave triggered a different thought I had recently about emergency preparedness and working with some agencies out here. And they, it seems like the concept of resilience is not just focused on the nonprofit or the network, but in the system. And, you know, it didn't occur to me until you raised the point about a lawsuit and how a networked agency or an umbrella agency could influence that policy environment. So, I mean, this concept of resilience isn't just for us in the nonprofit world, it's for everybody to react to each other. And, you know, I'm just so struck by that example that the public sector funders still required compliance and accountability as their overarching concept here during COVID. I mean, it's so clueless. It's such a clue. I don't know what else to say, but it just seems to me that this is a mainstream concept that we really hasn't worked its way into consciousness, you know?
And I think that we're getting there. I think that one of the benefits of the COVID situation is that it has caused the thinking about resiliency, whether in terms of, you know, nonprofits or whether in terms of just society in general. I think that we have been having that conversation a lot more often recently. So not a whole lot of good things, I would say, have come out of COVID. Like, I don't think COVID, yay. But I do think the fact that that so many people have been brought to this conversation, that it is definitely a positive. And yes, the movement to the courts, especially because most of those movements were successful. The nonprofits, you know, I remember talking to one of them and, you know, and hearing like, we never would have thought to sue the state, us. We are so glad that we were part of a network that had the ability to do this, because we tend to think about our own organizational resiliency. We're actually the surrogates almost. We are the service providers for an entire group of people, our service recipients. So our resiliency is never just going to be ours. It's also going to be theirs. So there is this, you know, this outward resiliency where we're talking about networks, but we can't ever forget that, and that's what's tied to our why. So resiliency is always a systemic concept for us. And so, and did I hear someone about to talk a second ago? Okay, I just don't want to cut anyone off for if they have something to say, but I can only see 4 of us when I'm presenting. So do feel free to speak up. So the ability to withstand adverse conditions while delivering services through time, I would even add, if that doesn't sound too corny, I think is the definition of resiliency that we are working with. Surviving, self-awareness, slack, flexibility, innovation. We've touched on a lot of words that are all a piece of this picture. But we're going to start kind of teasing this out into the 2 component pieces of preparation, where the key to preparation is going to be the concept of slack. And then management, where the key to management is going to be agility. So let's talk about this. Most of the modules in this series, today's, you know, the next one, are going to cover two distinct steps in being resilient, preparing for the crisis and managing the crisis. Many will focus kind of on the first one because a lot of the second one will depend on what you were able to get done on the first one. So we're going to figure out ways to get you as prepared as possible. And then we'll also talk about how to use those tools that we built in the preparation step during the management step. So the key for preparing for crisis is Slack. And Dennis and I actually had a healthy discussion, conversation, argument over the word Slack. Because we hear the word Slack and that is just not a flattering word. Like we hear it, you know, so it doesn't have a positive Slack. Like when, you know, growing up in the 90s, you know, you hear slacker, you know, so we thought, okay, so is there a better word for Slack? And so we kind of looked back over what people have called Slack to see if we could find a better word for this concept. So this does mean we're going to look at some more research studies, but not very many more, I promise. So what are some other words for Slack? What have people used? Well, the first one I think is really different. Liebenstein in 1966 called this. He noticed that some firms deliberately kept a little more resource around, and they didn't minimize costs. Now he was shocked that this was actually being done deliberately. And even though he thought that there was something inefficient and wrong about this process, other economists, which followed him, pointed out that there were managerial benefits to this. Liebenstein called it X inefficiency, which I think is a much more cutting edge sounding than Slack. But you probably wouldn't have signed up if we were putting on a course about X inefficiency. So it was definitely different, but not that wasn't a winner. And so this X inefficiency, it kind of bucked the trend because it wasn't the cost minimization that we were all learning about in business school. But something was definitely happening, and it kind of got the idea of Slack on the map. Then Herbert Simon made another step kind of toward normalizing the idea of Slack when he came up with the satisficing concept. So who here has heard of the term satisfice? Okay, Jenna, I saw your hand raised. Does anyone else? I can't see anyone else's hand, so I'm really kind of
Roll.
someone offer what does satisfice mean?
To satisfy, Simon said that people try to optimize, but in fact, they tend to stop their process when they get to the first acceptable solution. He said you could do very, very complex analyses to find the exact right answer, but after you get past a couple of orders of analysis, you're not really finding out anything more. And he generalized that to wide human practice and won a Nobel Prize for his trouble.
Yep. Yeah, nice. Yeah, and nice incentive, definitely. So yeah, Simon said essentially that the economists of the time had it wrong. People didn't actually they wouldn't look for the actual universal best solution. We weren't maximizing things. And he said that the reason is because that the search costs, the amount of time and effort of seeking the maximum of anything was just so huge. So picture this. Decide that you want a chicken sandwich for lunch. And I know we're getting close to lunch, so I'm running a risk here introducing a food analogy, but stick with me. So you naturally want a great chicken sandwich for lunch. You don't want to buy a subpar chicken sandwich. You want a good one. You want the best one. Sure, you want the best chicken sandwich. But are you going to research and test every chicken sandwich place within a 30-minute drive of you? just to make sure that you locate the absolute best one? Probably not. You're probably going to be happy with doing a little bit of information searching. Maybe you'll open Yelp. Maybe you've got some heuristics in there. I know this place, or I tried that place before and its other sandwich was terrible. You have some decision rules that are going to get you to a place that is good enough to try. And so this is what satisficing is. It means that most people and most organizations are not going to invest the effort that it takes to be perfect. It is a combination of satisfy and suffice. So you'll spend some time and energy looking for information, but you're not going to spend all of it. You're going to conserve some of your own personal resources for another use. So you don't always have to spend all of your time and energy chasing the absolute best option. And so this kind of sounds like common sense. Like, of course, you're not going to spend the rest of your day looking for the perfect chicken sandwich. But it was revolutionary at the time, because maximizing things, whether we're talking about profits or money or happiness, was how economics had explained human behavior, and that included management. So it really is instead about conservation and about making sure that you've got time and resources left over for all of the decisions that you may have to make later on today. So then we have March and Simon. So Herbert Simon got together with a colleague, explored this idea of this reserve, this slack, a little bit more, and said, actually, this slack helps keeps groups from fighting over limited resources. So if not only are you going to be exhausted if you spend all of your resources on all of these information searches, but having a little bit more left over keeps people from fighting like it was a zero-sum game and there was nothing left. So there's a positive HR benefit to having this slack around. And then March got together with another scholar in 1963, and they said, well, actually, it can provide balance in two different situations. So in the bad times, we've got this pool of emergency resources, having this slack around. But even in the good times, it provides a place for resources to go, like in terms of accounting, like mental accounting, that prevents a sprawl in operations. So this is something that I've noticed when working with people who have a background in government accounting. And that is that so much of government accounting on a year-to-year basis is making sure that you spend your allotment so that you don't lose any the next year. So if your department gets $10,000, if you don't use that $10,000, then you might not get $10,000 next year. So there's a disincentive to efficiency. So what Sire and Merge said was that essentially having this leftover, having a reserve, allows you to say, well, this money, this resource is going into the reserve with a label, and that will keep other operations that you've got going on from finding ways to absorb that slack, because slack isn't extra. It isn't resource laying there waiting for current operations. It is instead a deliberately purposed something that should be protected in an account, and that way it can be used for some other time. And then the same group published again in 1992, and essentially said that inefficiency actually serves a productive purpose, because it allows firms to manage internal conflict, deal with uncertainty, and encourage innovation. And this is where we start seeing the introduction of the I word another word that we see a lot of that can mean a lot of things, and that is innovation. Without Slack, it can be very difficult to have the time to innovate. Think back to that crazy hauling loop where we had the part that Stuart pointed out, where it was really inefficient figuring out how to do things a new way. But that finding out how to do it in a new way was absolutely necessary to being able to continue to provide services. So not only does it keep people from fighting and it helps tide you over through the lean times, but having this Slack encourages innovation, because you know that you don't have to spend every minute of your time finding a way to keep the lights on. Instead, if you've got a Slack pile, then you know that you've got 5 minutes to innovate or to think about the way to serve someone better. And that is crucial to being able to respond. Yes, Stuart.
So just, you triggered another thing. So just in terms of social enterprise, where the return on investment isn't all monetary, it is resilience, or in this case, Slack, even though we hate that word, part of the innovative part of it. So when you create that sub account in your budget, you could call it innovation. I mean, you don't want to call it the Slack account or the reserve account, because that's a nail head sticking up. But if you literally consider it investment income in the organization, rainy day. In Ohio, it's rainy day fund, but of course everyone criticizes the rainy day fund because why have one, right? So in your searchings and in the social enterprise thinking, is this one of the concepts or the categories?
I think it can be, and I think that because I'm a financial researcher, I think the best example of this I've seen in the conversations about total cost. So right now, we've been talking about making sure that there is some Slack left over. The total cost argument is essentially saying this isn't about Slack at all, that we should be building into all of our cost measures an amount of research and development that is a label for the Slack concept that we're essentially working with right now. The argument that essentially this is something that really innovative for-profits use and get funded, that why does a contract that a for-profit makes with the government include a 10% profit margin by default, whereas nonprofits are not, we're working with the cost reimbursement basis. It's not that we're functioning any differently. There's, sure, they have to send some money to their shareholders, but if research and development is universal across organizational types and whether or not you've got a tax exempt status, then that should be something that we should be including when we figure what it costs, just like we would any other indirect costs, like keeping the lights on in headquarters. And so I think that that's one of the ways that I've seen kind of handling the actual labeling of this Slack. But my lens tends to be very financial. So I do think that what you're talking about in terms of it having a different maybe label in social enterprise, is that kind of where you were going with it? Yeah.
Well, if I could I interrupt?
Yeah, sure.
I think it's important to think of this not just in financial terms as you've mentioned it. And it could be money, it could be, realization that you need to innovate over time and there ought to be money for that, and that can be kept aside. But it's also the way we use existing resources, whether everybody in the organization is totally programmed up the kazoo so that all they can focus on is getting the next service unit out, as opposed to having, having enough reserve built in, sorry about that, having enough reserve built in, so that in good times, one can think about innovating, and in bad times, one has the reserve to react to something that's important.
Agreed. It's almost like you knew the next slide was coming. So, it's, so we're done talking about, so people in the 60s talked about Slack. Now you're probably thinking, okay, so has anyone talked about Slack since the 60s? Like, of course they talked about Slack in the 60s. It was the 60s. Absolutely. But just like we have talked about all of those different ways that researchers described resiliency kind of over the years, we have been talking about it differently too. So, whether it's the finance people talking about R&D in, funding R&D in the cost structure, whether we're talking about, macroeconomic fiscal policy using benchmarking, which is essentially a Slack word because it's not about hitting a specific, definitely hitting a specific target. It's essentially about a best practice that you should aim for. Whether it's a private company talking about ballparking, which is another Slack-ish word because it's building in this margin of error. We are building in all of these different ideas and terms, the idea that not maximizing, that not being exact and about figuring in risk is not only just okay, but it's pretty much a necessity. So let's think about two modern-ish management scenarios. So who here, quick show of hands, has heard of just-in-time inventory? So just-in-time inventory means that the days of stockpiling things in warehouses was done. We would make it when it was ordered. It would conserve space. We wouldn't be paying for all of this warehouse space. And so we would save costs and then be able to and being able to save on storage costs and inventory management would equal more profit. The problem is, and I think the appearance of Amazon warehouses all over the United States has shown, is that really just in time can be very costly indeed because there isn't a lot of slack. So if you had an order with 0 days, or if you had 20 days without an order, and then all of a sudden you got an order for 200 widgets, then you weren't going to be able to be very responsive, and you were going to have to source whatever inputs went into your widgets. And that was going to cause potential stress for your suppliers. And so it minimized a particular cost, but at the expense of slack. And that lack of slack opened you up to risk from so many places in your supply chain. Compared to this kind of strategic positioning that Amazon now does in order to not make sure that you're going to get your product in 2 days, because Amazon Prime just isn't what it used to be pre-pandemic, but at least they're not having to make things from scratch, which I definitely appreciate. There is some slack in the system. They will get me whatever it is that I ordered from the warehouse in a reasonable amount of time. And I think that this can be compared to a system like agile management, which is based on a software production and development approach that is really focused on incremental change. So there's hyper communication. You're talking with individuals every day, and every day there's going to be a slight change, a slight adjustment, and so this kind of immediate contact and this kind of constant evolution, this learning environment, this allows for evolution, it allows for innovation, because you're okay not knowing exactly where you're going to end up on day 12 back on day 1. It's a part of the system knowing that you're going to be meeting with someone every day, with your team every day, it's not like it's going to go way off the rails. The hyper communication allows you to be agile. And I think that is a lot closer to what we're talking about here in terms of Slack. So it's not like everyone is sitting there waiting for orders from, you know, it's not that there's a bench. It just means that the small investment of time every day is allowing you the flexibility to not have these grand plans that would come with traditional project management. Ironically, most of the time, like if you Google Slack right now, you won't get anything of the, you know, dozens of definitions that we've talked about. You'll get the messaging device. So fair warning. And so this did cause me to ask myself whether or not Slack, the app, actually encouraged Slack, the concept. And I think in one it does, because one of the most useful applications for Slack that I have seen in day-to-day business, whether it's nonprofit or for-profit, is the back channel Slack. And so if you're on a call with a funder or a client or whatever, then being able to communicate with other people on your team in real time while talking to the client can be both informative, or if it is an unpleasant call, a stress relief. And so it builds in this additional space into these kinds of this hyper productive hour where you're having a business meeting. Slack does actually introduce some slack into your work life by allowing you to build your personal network and improve employee morale by sending affirmative messages out to your team while this other unpleasant call may be happening. So that's a good thing. Slack is providing slack in a way. But I think where I'm headed with this is that we're getting more comfortable, I think, with the idea of Slack in a whole lot of different ways. But I think that we have two main problems in the nonprofit sector. One is that we are constantly compelled to justify our need for Slack. And this can be pressure to, not have an operating surplus during a year. It can be pressure from the board. It can be a guilt by withholding some amount of resources today so that we can spend the resource tomorrow. But also, I think, picking the right level of slack. So even when we get to the point where we accept the fact that we need that surplus and we need that reserve, picking the exact right level of slack can be very, very difficult. And so I kind of like this picture. So what we're looking for is the Goldilocks level of slack. And this is another word that Dennis and I had a lot of conversation about. And I like this particular picture, a depiction of Goldilocks, because we've moved beyond the breaking and entering stage of the relationship. And Goldilocks and the bear are getting along well, but it really is finding the right level of slack. So not too much, not too little, but what is the right level? And I think that a lot of those specific exact level details are going to be that's where the section specific modules that are coming up are going to be extremely informative. So getting into what is the right level of slack for my balance sheet. Is it okay for me to have a liability? That's definitely sign up for that module. But my goal today is that if you are in the place where you need to be justifying the fact that there should be some slack built into individuals responsible for the management, the funding, or the governance of your organization, that you have the tools to justify that today. And so that is what I'm planning for you to leave with today. And so my computer has stopped responding. So let me fix that. There we go. Okay, so let's go from preparing for crisis to managing crisis. This is a screenshot from a 1972 movie called Hapkido, or when it was brought to the US was called Lady Kung Fu. And it is a really fabulous movie if you're into old martial arts movies. One, because they're just really, really good fight sequences, but two, it was really exceptional because it had a female protagonist. And you can see off to the right, she is about to enter an amazing display of prowess by handling a room full of an opposing school of martial artists. So why am I showing you this? Because in Hapkido, just like in many martial arts, the concept of space utilization is actually really key. So how you respond depends on the distance between yourself and any opponents, what their intentions are, what your intentions are, and etc. So, but it really is that the space itself is key, because how much space you have determines the responses that you are able to make and which one is the best fit for the situation. So the moves that she is about to engage in, if there were fewer people, if there were, people that were closer, that would definitely impact the choices that she had in terms of defending herself and surviving the situation. So in managing crisis, the key really is agility. So making sure that we have slack gives us the ability to position, to maneuver, and to respond. Will we be able to respond if we don't have an annual surplus, or if we don't have membership in a larger network? Of course, but we're not going to have the same amount of room to move, to maneuver, to respond, and to innovate. So it's all about having some degree of space in which we can actually respond to the organization using a number of different possibilities. So it allows us to not only continue to provide services through these kinds of crises, but as Stuart mentioned earlier, it also allows us to grow during non-crisis. So it will strengthen our organization, and it allows us to help those that we are serving, either because they are the people that we're targeting with our mission, or they're other organizations that are in the same network. They will also become stronger when we have the room to maneuver. It also, as I mentioned a couple of seconds ago, it's key to helping us become learning organizations. So if we are always obsessed with keeping the lights on every day, then it can be difficult to instate a lot of best practices. That's one of the reasons that I like running service learning projects with my classes. So all of my classes, we always work with nonprofits in the community, especially with classes like strategic planning. And we'll work with very, very small organizations, because in my experience, the organizations that may be in the most need of a strategic plan are the ones that are so busy doing that they don't have the time to put together a strategic plan. And so being able to build in some slack, which in this case is me being able to bring a team of students that are gung-ho about learning strategic planning, that is giving them some breathing space so that they can continue doing what they're doing while we can also kind of bring in our own capacity building. So I want to be mindful of our time. I only have about 10 more minutes before we break. And so I'm going to just looking at what we have left. Good, we'll look at stuff. It just won't be an in-depth conversation. So these are the upcoming modules where we're going to look at not only Slack, but what level of Slack is going to be the most appropriate, how to discover it. And we're actually going to make the first step toward that at the end of today's session. I've put together a worksheet that is going to help us look at each one of these areas in our own organization. It can be, the one, a nonprofit that you're working for, or it can be one that you work with, that you volunteer for. Just use an organization of meaning. And I want to start to get you thinking about, okay, so in terms of human resources, this is where I feel that we currently are at. Our morale is high. Our pay is slightly below for-profits in the area, but pretty much on par with nonprofits. We don't have a very organized volunteer, coordination, but we've sure got a lot of people that want to come out. And then, so we'll start to assess, and then the worksheet will lead us through thinking about how to take where we are, analyze it for where we can build in Slack, and then you should be able to take that to whichever modules you follow up with and build on that idea. So as a real quick illustration of a mini case study, because we'll be doing a case study later, is Hull House. So who here, just show of hands, has heard of Hull House? Okay, awesome. It's fairly well known, founded in 1889. It began as a place for women to provide classes and training, and then social services to the neighborhood. In the 20th century, they moved from just providing services into advocacy because they realized a lot of the problems that they were trying to address, such as a lack of education, poverty, had an advocacy and policy component to it. But then it was a renowned institution that then, to many people that were not on the inside, all of a sudden, one day, up and closed. And so there was a lot of kind of talk and introspection as to what exactly happened in Hull House. And so this, I thought, was a handy diagram that someone put together in looking at the Hull House closure situation. And I've circled the ones that involve finance, because normally when you ask someone, well, why did something close? So, oh, they ran out of money. I'm like, oh, okay, that's, ran out of money. That's it. It's really, really never that simple. Resiliency is a multifaceted portfolio concept, and our responses should also be multifaceted portfolio responses. So if you came into today thinking that you were just going to be taking the HR module follow-up, and that was the only one you were interested in, man, I implore you, it's about having a portfolio of tools, because it rarely is just one thing that is a source of risk and vulnerability. And so looking at Hull House, yes, there was potential financial mismanagement, but there were a lot of other things going on there. So the drift away from the original mission, the communication issues that members of the staff and the board were having, the general lack of effective ward governance, the death of the founder, all of these things. And the death of the founder, that that can impact that core why. So all of these things kind of compounded, and did the doors close because there wasn't enough money? Yes, technically that's probably why the doors closed, because there wasn't enough money. But why wasn't there enough money? And it's because of a host of reasons, in addition to financial ones like over-reliance on government funding and inadequate fundraising. So if the board of Whole House had, really buckled down on one of these things, if they had decided, well, we're going to focus on mission. They went through, they used my students for a strategic planning session, and we got really laser focused on mission. Would that have saved Whole House? We will never know, but my guess would be probably not. It probably would have taken a portfolio approach, looking at everything, looking at the system in order to be a resilient organization. So would it have helped? Yes. Would a mission focus have potentially leaked out into the other problem areas and helped them? Potentially. But the problems are multifaceted problems, and those multifaceted problems require multifaceted responses. So understanding the multifacetedness, this list in the middle are the list of all of the modules that you have the opportunity to sign up for and get kind of specifics on at later dates. But this is I can't overstate the importance of this portfolio approach. So knowing that resilience, slack, flexibility and agility, and then risk, which will be the next module offered. Understanding risk, these creep into your balance sheet, your income statement, your treatment of technology, your human resources. They permeate everywhere. And so it's important to think about them all. And so, as Dennis kind of said when we were kicking this all off, nonprofit management, and I've been teaching it for a few years now, we've been focused on efficient because that's what we're pushed to, and effective, which is important to us because we really want to move the needle for people, even though it can be really hard to measure. But we need to get beyond that. We need a change in paradigm, because efficiency is not determined, solely by input or output pricing. It needs good impact measures. And those impact measures need to be long-term and not just short-term. We need to be able to tell the board member that says, why aren't we spending the money on people today? We need to be confident in saying, because by having this reserve today, we are going to be better positioned to provide resources for people a year from now. We don't want to feed one person today at the cost of 20 people next year, same day. And we need to be comfortable with that kind of across time conversation, because it can be a hard one. And that even with impact and a timeless time horizon, it's still not going to be about efficiency. We're not about efficiency. We're not the for-profit sector. We are organizational creatures that are trying to, yes, Stuart?
So you just touched my my heartstrings here. So so this concept that what makes the nonprofit sector different, and pushback that's required to arguments that say things like, well, you're not working more like a business, or you're not as accountable as a business. I mean, I guess the more kinds of rationale like this, it's almost a principle, is this efficiency thing is not, it's not the same measure in the nonprofit sector as it is in business or government. And I can understand that. I can understand why. I just, I guess I'm starting to realize that this is really a central concept of what makes a nonprofit a nonprofit. You know, the institution part of it, the durability part of it is as important as the performance, it seems. And I don't know who wrote that or if it's anywhere in the literature, but maybe that's my aha by listening to you. I'm not sure.
Well, and it's, Dennis, go ahead. Dennis, you're muted.
You know, we can think of nonprofits that way, that we don't judge them solely by the quality of the service that we got yesterday or today, but by the fact that we have, you know, reassurance and comfort that they're there. I mean, I don't go to the symphony every day, but I get satisfaction in the fact that it's there and it's going to be there, and that there's a hospital and important social agencies and universities and so forth. So I think that's part of it. But part of it is also interpreting. I mean, you know, we're playing with a lot of words, but interpreting efficiency in the right way. That we're often focused on measures of very short-term efficiency. And what we're really interested in, as Elizabeth is explaining, is how efficient are we in really accomplishing our goals over the long term, which requires that you be there over the long term, you be viable as an institution over the long term, so that you can have that, you know, better long-term impact and achievement of the mission. So all of these things are kind of connected, I think.
I think so. And I think that we find ourselves in this hotly contested spot where but I'm pushing back pretty strongly against using efficiency as a measure of our worth. But I'm also still a firm believer that we need program evaluation in order to make sure that we are in fact being effective. So many times you'll find anti-efficiency people and anti-evaluation people are the same people. And I'm not. I do think that we need to be good stewards of the resources that we have. And that means that, you know, we're not foundations. We're not just bringing in the money and then sitting on it so that we can use it 5 years from now. Like that, that's not what we do.
Right.
But finding the balance is really the key part, and being able to justify finding that balance between spending today to meet mission, but having enough slack to meet mission next year, unless we're planning to not be here next year. If we're planning to be around, then we need to resource the ability to be around. And finding that sweet spot is the key, and why I'm probably going to be attending the other sessions, because I'm really interested in seeing how other people teach this, because this is something that is, I think, always the where the rubber meets the road, I think is always the interesting spot. And I'm very comfortable defending why Slack is important. But the ideal spot for each organization, I think, can be very subsector specific. So I'm really interested in seeing what, especially in things that I don't know, that I'm not an expert in, like the technology, I'm really interested in finding how to find the technology Slack sweet spot for organizations, so that I can then pass that information on to those that I do capacity building for. This new orientation, and I know that I'm about 4 minutes over, so I'll wrap this up. Will do a lot, I think, to move us past operational logistics, which are super important. I say this as a logistics type of person, but it's about more than the efficiency of the organization. We are organizations providing public goods like government with the organizational bodies of private companies like for-profits. That is always going to cause problems, but it will always encourage innovation, creativity, and is having listened to everyone's whys. That kind of difficulty is kind of what drew us here in the first place. So thinking about resiliency more often will help us do things like incorporate measurement systems, like we're going to be talking about red flags in one of the modules, or identifying new opportunities that come from crisis. Like our focus is on surviving crisis, but there is that positive element, that innovation, that opportunity for growth. These are things that a nonprofit resiliency management orientation, I think, are going to give us. And so as a sneak peek, during the break, I'll be sending you 3 different things, none of which you have to actually look at during the break, so feel free to get some lunch. This is the take-home exercise, where if you are wanting credit toward the certificate, that this is that inventory that I told you you can fill out, and we'll go over it a little bit more at the end of the session. I'm also going to be, so I'll send you this so that you can have it. I'll also send you the case study description, which is going to be a couple pages long, describing a very real but anonymous organization that we are going to talk about during the last part of today. And then it's going to be a document that has some questions for the case study. And I don't need you to, you don't need to fill it out. This isn't an assignment, you don't have to turn it in. It's really just more to guide your thinking for the discussion part. And we will break into probably smaller groups for a while during the case study part, and then come back together. But so that's going to be coming to you during the break. What is happening immediately next, though, is that I am bringing in 3 nonprofit leaders from different parts of the United States and from different subsectors to talk about resilience, how they have been resilient and how they are hoping to become more resilient. And they will be talking for the next segment of the course. They actually don't come on until noon. I knew myself, and I knew I had a tendency to go over. So I do want to respect that half hour that you get to eat. So let's go ahead and reconvene. I have that it is 12:22 Eastern. So let's go ahead and try and get back together at 10 minutes till 1. That way we can all be together and ready when our speakers join us at 1 o'clock sharp. So does anyone have any questions? Right, I will stop sharing so that I actually see if people have questions. There we go. So are there any questions? If not, then I will allow everyone to grab some lunch and refuel, because the last section of the panel, they're actually really interested in talking to you about what you do and about your experiences as well. So so fuel up, and I look forward to seeing y'all in another 30 minutes. Good. And then Stuart, would you prefer us all log out and then log back in?
Well, I'm not sure. I think, why don't we just leave it open and put everybody on mute? I have to turn off the recording part, and if it doesn't work, then log back in.
Okay, that sounds good.
All right.
Thank
Okay.
you. See you soon.
It is so much noise.
Well, and I recognize the fact that all 3 of our speakers, like I could not have picked a busier time for any of you, because Froswa has the fair coming up, like literally any minute now. Joe is getting ready for the post-audit meeting, which is always a big to-do. And then Will, when we get him in here, he is coming up on a North Texas Giving Day, which is always a big kind of showstopper fundraising event that a lot of different organizations are a part of. So I know they've got plus I think they're in the middle of a campaign kind of on their own now as well. So so I picked the absolute worst time, and yet y'all still said yes. So thank you. And I'm really looking forward to hearing some of what y'all have to say. I'm looking at the questions and I'm like, I'm really curious about everyone's different perspective on this. Make sure we don't have anything from Will.
I will note, as I have in the past, Dr. Searing's text and code switching, because she never used the word y'all quite that much when she was living in upstate New York.
It always was there. It just wasn't as prevalent.
Right.
Same thing as pop, because I've picked up words in all of the places I've lived. But now that they're all in one vocabulary, they can sound pretty odd next to each other. So down here I can say y'all and I don't get made fun of. So I use it all the time.
Not making fun, just
Is that a
noting.
Texas y'all or is it a Georgia y'all? Same thing, I guess.
Yeah, it is a Texas y'all. So it started in Texas, and the important all y'all, because you is singular, then there's y'all, and then there's all y'all. So really only the Southerners go for the all y'all.
You got it. Oh, yes.
That might be handy in the current debate around using they.
Yeah, maybe. But so, and you can tell the true Southerners as well, because it is one of the few words that I have ever seen use two apostrophes. So y'all's, like, I want to be respectful of y'all's time. That is a Y apostrophe ALL apostrophe S. And my phone does not correct me, which means it is the honest truth, because it corrects everything.
Well, I'm honored to be part of my first official all y'all.
Yeah.
It's a red letter day for me.
So, but we had Will and then we lost him. All right, so we have our speakers. Let me take a quick look at the room to make sure that we have everyone that we started with. Hopefully so. Hey, Roland. All right, so it looks like we have most of everyone back. So welcome back. Hope everyone had a good break. We are about to start. I mean, y'all did a fantastic job during the first part of the training module today. I know it was a lot of me talking, so thank you for participating when I stopped, and we were able to get conversations going. But this starts what I think is really the high point of the module today, because we have three people that, one, I just personally think the world of, but two, are coming from very different organizations with very different perspectives on what nonprofit resilience is and how they have kind of operationalized it for themselves and their organization. So we're going to have kind of a little bit of discussion amongst the panelists for a little while, probably 45 minutes or so. But then we're going to open it up, and for the rest of this time block, then we're going to get a conversation with y'all involved as well. And now I'm going to be super self-conscious about the amount of times I use y'all. But it makes me happy. It brings me joy. So you are simply making me more aware of my own joy. So thank you, Joe. So let me introduce the three panelists that we have for today. As I mentioned earlier, I managed to get them all at a uniquely stressful time for each one of them, whether it's before the big audit meeting, before the state fair, or before North Texas Giving Day. And despite it being at a uniquely stressful time, they all said yes, they would love to come today. So thank you. And so I'll give a brief introduction, but then I am going to pass the mic around so that you can tell a little bit about your organization. So today we have Joe Burke from Altamont, New York. He is the director of the Altamont Free Library there. We also have Dr. Francois Booker-Drew, who is the director of, and I want to get this right, director of Community Affairs and Strategic Alliances at the State Fair of Texas, which is coming up here in a few weeks. I am really looking forward to my very first Texas State Fair. And then we have also from the DFW area, Will Evans, who's the executive director of Deep Vellum. And so thank you everyone for joining us. And let's go in reverse order. And y'all just go ahead and tell us a little bit about your nonprofit and what it is that you do. Will, let's get it to you first.
Thank you so much. An honor to be here today with these other panelists and to meet you all. My name is Will Evans. I founded Deep Vellum Publishing. It's a literary arts nonprofit and publishing house based in Dallas. In 2013, we're in the historic Deep Vellum neighborhood. We're neighbors of the State Fair. We could practically high five each other outside the window. And the mission of Deep Vellum is to bring the world into conversation through literature. And so to that end, we have published in our first 8 years 1,000 books, translated from 60 languages by authors from 80 countries. So we specialize with authors from right here in our own backyard. We got tons of authors from Dallas, often their first book. We just relaunched a book that's been out of print for 35 years. That's considered like a classic work of Dallas history that has a really interesting story to it and is getting a lot of great press. And then we started out doing only translated literature. But the big question about all of this when you publish a book is like, well, what do you do with the book once it's published? And so we organize a lot of events, discussion-driven events to connect readers and writers to support a lifelong love of reading. And so everything that we do is to that end.
Thank you, Will. Francois?
So I am Dr. Francois Booker-Drew, and I got promoted. I serve as Vice President of Community Affairs. And so in my role, I'm responsible for our philanthropic giving, our educational programming, and our community initiatives. When I started in 2016, there was not a department that really focused on those areas. And so what we really look at is a couple of things. How do we support economic development, capacity building for nonprofit organizations? Because a lot of funders don't give funding for operating or to help organizations really build their infrastructure. And so we do that. In addition to that, we have a funding category that is around racial and social justice. And then education, how do we support our local schools? The State Fair has been around for over 130 years. And so it is a massive event, as Elizabeth mentioned, that we're getting ready for. Typically, we have about 2.3 million visitors in 24 days. And yes, we're doing protocols and making sure that we're making it safe for our visitors. So my role is really looking at how do we make sure that we're being a good community neighbor to the surrounding zip codes immediately in our area, which is South Dallas Fair Park, an area that is extremely challenged, but has so much possibility and has got some amazing people here that are doing great work. And I'm just glad to be a part of it.
Thank you, Francois. Joe?
Hi, thank you so much, Dr. Searing. My name is Joseph Burke. I'm the director of the Altamont Free Library in Altamont, New York. We're about 30 minutes west of the city of Albany in upstate New York. I serve a community of 1,720 people. We've been chartered as a public library since 1916. We reside in the historic, beloved Altamont train station, which is going to turn 125 years old next year, and which is listed on the National Registry of Historic Places. We have a budget of about $165,000. That's for everything, salaries, insurance, books, programming, everything. We do quite a lot with quite a little, and we're very, very proud of the work that we do, serving a very interesting community here in upstate New York. We are, in addition to being a library, we're also what's known as an association library, which is to say that we are also a 501c3 nonprofit organization. So we can do some things that other libraries can't do with municipal libraries or school district public libraries, which you might be familiar with that structure. As a 501c3, we can do our own fundraising, and we do quite a bit of that. And we'll probably get into some of that later on. Over the past 4 years, we have 3 times been named a Library Journal Star Library, which is essentially the highest accolade that a public library can receive. And I'm very, very proud of the work that my staff and I and my board of trustees have done to earn that honor.
All right, thank you so much, Joe. So let's get this kicked off. You can see that everyone does something a little bit different. We have a small library. We have a publishing house, and then we have a capacity builder. Many different reasons that we should be coming to the table today with potentially different definitions of what this word resiliency means. Those of us on the call have talked about numerous words for this, including some really weird ones. What do you think of when someone says the word resiliency in terms of your nonprofit? Joe, let's start with you.
Sure. Over the past couple of years, a major focus of our organization at the board level has been on sustainability, which I think for the purposes of this discussion, we can use as a synonym for resiliency. We take as our model of sustainability the New York Library Association Sustainability Initiative, which is a wonderful program, and I would encourage anybody who is interested in the concept of organizational sustainability to look into that. But we have a three-legged structure, a three-legged definition of sustainability that encompasses both economic sustainability, making sure that your organization has the economic resources and financial resources to sustain over the long term. Environmental sustainability, which is to say that we are leaving a positive impact to the greatest extent that we can on our natural and built environment. And the third leg is organizational sustainability, which is to say having resilient organizational structures in place so that you can bounce back in times of crisis or from a disaster. So that's the definition of sustainability and resiliency that we work with here. I kind of think about it in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where at the base of your pyramid, you have those very basic concerns about making sure that your organization has a home, that you have the basic financial resources to keep your staff paid. And then as you move up the top of the pyramid, you're moving towards what in the sort of personal sense would be self-actualization, but maybe in the organizational scheme. And there are tons of different Maslow's spin-offs within the organizational psychology sphere. And oftentimes you'll see, the one that I was looking at most recently was Rebecca Goldberg's. But there's a ton of different ones. So the top of that pyramid is pioneering, and so where we are is I feel like, we're not really innovators, we're not really pioneers. What we do is we have served the bottom couple of levels of that pyramid of needs, and we are able to, in the midst of a crisis, be part of the solution, as opposed to being concerned at all times with self-preservation. So that, I think, is the important thing to think about, that in terms of making sure that you have the internal resources and the organizational resources to be able to care for yourself, and then be able to move beyond that and care for the community that you serve and all of your stakeholders.
Thanks, Joe. And I think that it's especially interesting how, when you were talking about the 3 pillars, really only one of them was specifically organizationally focused. The others kind of brought in the outside world, whether we're talking about environmental sustainability. And that's one of the things that we worked on this morning was, saying, yes, part of resiliency is the organizational level, but there's also networks and things that extend outside of your organizational walls that will also play into resiliency. Will, I'm gonna go to you. What does resiliency mean to you?
Oh, I don't know. I think resiliency means a lot of different things. And I think the hierarchy needs actually really great. So instead of repeating anything that Joe just said, because it was so brilliant and absolutely true, I guess we talk about, like, when you set up shop in Dallas, Texas, resiliency is kind of built into the DNA of Texans. And I'm not a native Texan, but I married one, and my kids are like 11th generation Texans. So it's like I feel a part of this. And the culture of Texas, the one true thing we can all get behind here is that, like, you gotta work to survive around here, man. It's hot, it's dry in a lot of places, it's crazy. And so resiliency is about making the most of the opportunities that are given to you with the resources that are available to you, and building something lasting and sustainable in the terms that Joe just mentioned, because it's really vital. And I think what you just said, Dr. Searing, is so vital too, because the fourth sort of thing there is like the resiliency of your network, because our strength is only really as strong as the community we're a part of. And so resiliency for Deep Ellum had been at different points along the way, focusing on the economic, focusing on the environmental, focusing now on the organizational, right? We've grown to a point where it's like, oh boy, governance is the word I throw around a lot more than I ever threw around before. And so making sure that everything can be a bedrock, right? Foundations, there's not just one pillar, right? It takes multiple. And for example, the resiliency that we talked about, of course, we're going to touch on the pandemic later, and I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but last year during the pandemic, when things got so scary, the first couple of months of the pandemic were terrifying for every organization. And for us, it was the same way. And then people kept reading. And the supply chain wasn't disrupted too much to be able to keep books in people's hands. So people were buying books from wherever they could, supporting bookstores and nonprofit organizations like ours. And so our year, which had been planned to be our biggest year ever, it was budgeted to be much bigger than we'd ever been. It stayed right on track. And so we said, okay, we're going to be okay. Our community is not. And so for the first time, we set up a fund and we dispersed grants to writers in Texas. They just could apply and just say, hey, man, I'm having a hard time. That's all they had to say, and we would give them money. And we ended up giving away $25,000. We could really use $25,000, but we were like, what? We're going to be okay. Let's go give it back. And so it's a way of paying forward the resiliency, right? If we're going to be okay, we got to make sure that our neighbors are okay too. And that's sort of baked into the DNA of Texas. Like you hear about this cowboy mentality, but cowboys come together and they work together towards common goals. And the community of Dallas is really strong. You're about to hear that from Dr. Booker Drew. And so it's really crazy to adapt your business model on the fly, to be constantly learning on the fly. But it's exciting. And the hard times go to show you where your real strength is. And that resiliency is something we turn to. So during the pandemic, at all points, we kept inflecting, going, what is resiliency to us? What is the thing we want to come out the other side of this? And we're still not out the other side of it, but it's like, what is the way that we can be a better, not just a stronger, but a better serving nonprofit organization on the other side of this than we were when this whole thing kicked off. And so resiliency is about adaptation as well, in addition to all those things that Joe and I just mentioned.
Yes, absolutely. And I love how I mean, this was, I swear to the participants, I did not cue them in any way to say certain things. Like I just gave the questions. They are simply naturally touching on some of the things that we've talked about in terms of, you know, resiliency also meaning these positive things. Like we always talk about it, like, you know, it is only brought about during the course of disasters, but it can enable good things. And in addition to this being a concern for networks and things, you know, on the organizational level, we also should be thinking about our service recipients. And that's an excellent example. I didn't even know that that y'all had done that, but fantastic idea, right in line with mission, and a really, really good way to encourage resiliency in the people that are a part of your network. So with that, let's go to Francois, from a, let's say, more of a capacity building lens and building on your experience. What do you think of when you hear resiliency?
You know, during the last year or so, for me, it was watching a lot of our nonprofits bounce back. But I'm also a little bit hesitant on just focusing on the positives of resilience, because I think what we do is say to people, you can go through all these things and you should be okay. And I remember when we had Snowmageddon here, and I was so irritated because people had, you know, to leave their homes and find places to stay and find food and all these different things. And then they went back to work on a Monday and it was like nothing happened. And so part of the thing that I think is the both and with resiliency is also being aware of trauma. And I don't think we recognize that even though you bounce back, there is still impact that you have endured. So if you think about a fork and being bent and it bounces back into shape, it still is going to take some time for it to get back to its original state, if it ever does completely. And I think that's the same thing that you have to keep in mind with nonprofit organizations. Yeah, they might be out there doing the work, but what I noticed is a lot of our folks have not stopped. They have been consistently just working. And I'm really concerned about how do we make sure that mental health and those kinds of conversations are a part of when we talk about resiliency, and not just the individual, but the culture of an organization is also impacted because of having to bounce back. And then think about it, if you have all these situations, whether it is the, you know, what happened in Louisiana where I'm from, and there are hurricanes and pandemic and all these different things back to back to back, at some point, the state that you've been in is going to change. And so you will not come out being the same person. And I think we have to be aware, as you know, brought up earlier, about the adaptation that occurs as a result of resiliency. And we have to keep that in mind, because a lot of people go through this in organizations and they don't always come on the other side being the way that they started out. Some may actually morph into something better, but for a lot of organizations, they may actually get left behind because they don't have the support and they don't have the networks and the infrastructure that they need to, you know, survive.
Well, and I think that brings up something that actually I didn't touch on earlier, and that is that we've talked about the network, you know, the peer organizations, and we've talked about the service recipients. But other than kind of, you know, talking about why we joined the nonprofit sector, we didn't mention earlier about kind of the attention to the self, which is something that you just emphasized, where there is, I remember seeing on some social media feed the other day that said something like, that person, you know, that always tries to do everything, that person is not okay right now. And that's what popped into my head when you said that, because you're right, that's organizations are going through trauma. And even if they are resilient, they are going to come out changed. And we should be thinking the same about us, about the people that work for us, that it's not just the organization enduring change, that there are actually going to be impacts on the people involved, and that those should also be a part of our planning and consideration when we think about how to move forward, including how to best take care of our people when we start thinking about how to use Slack and what we need and things. So, so thank you for that perspective. I know that we have been, we've been trying to avoid COVID to this point, but I really think that now I want to fully engage because I know that that has been the trauma that we have experienced and pivoted around and done everything. And I think it's unique because we are in the business of responding to horrible things, chronic horrible things, sudden horrible things. If the world was perfect, there wouldn't be a need for what we do. But I think that COVID was different because it caused a sudden adjustment to a lot of the different things that we did. So it wasn't just that, you know, the government didn't pay a check for 2 years. It was that we couldn't have someone, and we couldn't have people to the libraries. We couldn't bring people to the museums. More people than normal were homeless. How were we going to be able to feed people when we couldn't actually come into contact? Just the scale of the disruption, I think, is really interesting listening to how organizations got through this. And so I am going to ask that question now. I hate to bring you back into the first days of COVID, but I am curious, what are some of the challenges that your organization saw during the COVID era, and which I guess is still ongoing, and how did you respond to those challenges? And Joe, we'll head back to you.
May I share my screen for a moment?
You should be able to now.
Great, thank you. Can everybody see the photograph that's up? All right.
Hold on just one second.
Here, let me, sorry, here we go. How about now?
Yes.
All right. Well, because Elizabeth, Dr. Searing mentioned the early days of the crisis, I just wanted to mention the reason that I'm here today, which is that I am paying back Dr. Searing for a presentation that she did in a panel that I put on. This photograph was taken on Saturday, March 7th, 2020. And we had heard some discussion about something that might be coming down the pike. And for the organizers of the panel that we were doing back when you could do something like this, we thought it might be wise to set those chairs about 6 inches apart, so that people would have some additional breathing space. We bought a bottle of Purell and we set it on the registration table because we thought that that was something that we ought to do to keep our attendees healthy and safe. Dr. Searing that day presented a wonderful presentation about 10 cool ways of blowing up your organization, of blowing up
top
your
10 ways to kill your library.
That's
yes.
right. That's right. The overall theme of the event that we were hosting on March 7th, 2020, was the panel was called "Other Duties as Assigned." Other duties as assigned: what they don't teach you in library school, and it was targeted towards folks who were currently in library school or were young professionals who may have been through a library school education and were just we were trying to fill in some of the gaps about what they don't teach you and what you can only learn by practical experience. It was only a week later, on Saturday, March 13th, 2020, that Elizabeth and I and my entire board were on the phone talking about closing the library. That was a very long week. And making the decision to close the library for what turned out to be 3 months was one of the hardest decisions that I've ever had to make. And the sort of trauma as Dr. Booker Drew describes. I don't know that I'll ever quite get over the lack of external leadership that I felt at the time, the lack of direction, the lack of I felt, and I think I can speak for my board at the time, I felt like I was entirely on my own, and that we were making these decisions, these very weighty decisions in a vacuum. And at first we decided that we were going to be closed for 2 weeks, and those 2 weeks turned into 3 months. So the challenge was negotiating a challenge that nobody involved in the organizational leadership of my library had even contemplated when they began their jobs, that we would have to be closed for longer than the library had ever been closed before in its history. And having to, feeling like, there's so many ways to be wrong. And it was a very fraught, very anxiety producing couple of weeks. Those first weeks in March and April, where we were getting conflicting signals from the state, from the county, from the federal government, to the extent that we were getting any useful information from the federal government at that point. And we simply didn't know what to do. And so we had to rely on the network of the library community for direction, for support, for moral support, for organizational support. And this was a network made up similarly of people who had never remotely contemplated what we were having to do. In the end, I think we came out all right. But as I say, I don't know that I'll ever forget the lack of leadership and direction that we saw at that point.
Thank you, Joe. And yeah, I remember the just trying to figure out the tactile component of running a library, and how every library was trying something different. I think that Guilderland had a book drop off, and it was like composting, where you would drop off as many books and then you would leave it to age, because we weren't quite sure what caused COVID at that point, and people would drop off in another drop off box. And so there were just different bins of drop off. And then when one had aged enough, we would bring it in, they would bring it inside. And we had a smaller circulation. So I think we didn't have bins, but it was a.
Oh no, we were quarantining for up to a week at the outset. And was that too long? Was it too short? We didn't know. There was the science wasn't available yet. We had conjectures based on previous epidemics, but that wasn't particularly useful information for a novel coronavirus. And so, like I say, I mean, there's so many ways of being wrong. We tried to be wrong in the direction of preserving safety and health and the security of our public, while maintaining the balancing act of providing as much access to community resources as we could, and knowing where that balance was, how to calibrate that balance was very difficult. Was very, I mean, you can sort of the visual image is revealing. I mean, if you think of yourself on a board on a barrel, and you're tipping and you get vertigo after a while, trying to maintain that balance at all times, and you can't rest, and you can't you have no stability, you have so
well, and like I think that knowing and having a lot of people in the village, being elderly patrons of the library, that we didn't want to get sick, but also, even though the library is a free library 501c3, that there was still government funding coming in. Like, how do you balance the we're being paid to serve the community versus the we definitely don't want to kill anybody? And so that's that having to struggle with that on a daily basis was definitely is what was difficult. And so thank you for shouldering much of.
And I
much
don't
of-
want to take up, I don't want to take up any more time on this question, but we haven't said this yet. But as we sort of talked around, Dr. Searing was on our board of trustees at the time, and she was our treasurer, and so she had an insider's view, and she was an invaluable resource. So thank you for the
do miss you
time.
guys. Yeah. Will, I know that, and this, I thought this was interesting actually after I assembled the panel, that I have two book related organizations. But your services, though involving books, are significantly different than those of the library. So what challenges did y'all face when COVID reared up?
We're not that different from a library. We don't have a collection per se, but I think that the main programmatic activity of the library, he'll tell you, has to do with the community and the patrons more than just the books themselves. It's the same way with us. Every book we publish is the means to a conversation with the world, with the public, to connect these readers and these writers. And we used to do that in person. We have a bookstore. It's like a storefront here in Deep Ellum. And we would host events 7 nights a week. For 6 years, we've been in this space. We've hosted hundreds and hundreds of events, bringing authors, performers, artists, comedians, filmmakers, musicians. I mean, we've had dozens of different genres of events. And, we were doing events all the way up to, what was it, like March 16th? I think the lockdown here started March 17th, if I remember correctly. And I was out of the country the week before while the world started melting down. And I made the mistake of checking my phone one night before going to bed, and I saw that the NBA had canceled its season, and I said, oh, fuck, this vacation is over. You know what I mean? Forgive the language. And so then my wife and I, and our very, very young children, they were 3 and 1 at the time, we were like, okay, how are we going to, they became our first priority. Like, what are we going to do with them? They're in daycare, and she has a really high stress job. And, I'm the director of this organization that's still kind of in startup mode. And so we came home. Thankfully, we got home before they shut down international flights. And we got home and the world shut down the next day. And so it was immediately like, all right, what's the safety of our family first, staff second, and then the business is third, right? And that was that first month, was like, how can we protect our family? How can we protect our staff? And thankfully, we're in a line of work where like we can work from home. And so everybody started working from home, and it was okay. But then the uncertainty was like, warehouses were shutting down, supply trucks stopped shipping out. And that's where the whole thing for us starts going, because like the money we make is primarily through book sales, right? And so if you can't buy and sell a book, then it's like, we're not exactly an organization rolling in grant money. So like the book sales for us are still the main part of our budget. And so we're like, all right, this is going to be great. We're just not gonna be able to sell any more books. We can't go in the office. But as we all know, politically, the lockdown in Dallas and in Texas has been very different than Altamont, New York, and very different than our friends in LA, very different than our friends in London or Germany or Japan. Well, needless to say, some of the suppliers in China for a lot of publishers, they use printers over there. So everybody got hit by this totally differently based on where they were and where their suppliers were. And so that, like, as Dr. Booker Drew said, like, different organizations can adapt differently when the resources that they have available to them, and as Joe said, politicians and leaders at the top. We live in this county where the leadership of the county was pretty reactive, and they said, look, we need to protect each other, right? Here you go. But we're in a state where the leadership was like, no, you need to get back together and take off your masks and kill each other. And it was like this cognitive dissonance that was very confusing. And of course, the New York Times reports on it in a way that makes it seem like Texas is always one thing, and in reality, it's just not. And so we're trapped here where we're like, I'm a business owner, and I want to make money for my business, but I also want to protect my family, my customers, my staff, and everything. So you're caught in this like, oh my gosh, I cannot make the right choice. There is no right choice. And like Joe said, there's no guidance. Our board was like, we don't know either. Good luck. Like, we're going to figure it out though, right? Don't kill anybody. We're like, okay, so we're shutting down. If we don't have any cash coming in now, what do you do? And then if you don't remember, there was a tragic death of George Floyd last year, and there were protests all over the country. And the fight for civil rights and justice in Dallas is a long-standing issue. The relationship with the African-American community and the police in Dallas is really fraught. And there were some really beautiful, huge protests in the city that after the protests were over, some young troublemakers started going around and smashing windows in the neighborhood where we are. And so one night I'm laying in bed watching a live stream of a local journalist watching my store as the mob was coming down the street. And I was like, oh no, I'm gonna have to deal with this. Glass on the street in the morning. They were smashing all of our neighbors. It's like, okay, this is gonna be bad. But then I saw our neighbors upstairs. And you talk about community, this is what it's all about. And these guys, middle-aged, amazing dad, Black dudes, and they stood there and they went out to the mob and they said, you guys should go home. You guys are out for nothing but trouble and you're ruining the movement. And I was watching this live and it was just like the whole stress of those first months. The stress was coming from every possible angle. And they passed over our building. And then the mob just dispersed and everything was okay after that, thankfully. But like, that would have been just property damage, you know? That was it. Like, I understood the anger of the moment, the anger, the fear, and just everything that was going on. And to be able to say, all right, well, what are we going to do about it? And so we just like, okay, we all have Zoom now. Apparently everybody in the world discovered Zoom at the same time. And we just started doing discussions online. We're like, look, we have authors in Brazil we've never been able to bring to Dallas. We did an interview with our author in Brazil, in Russia, and Indonesia. And we started doing events by people in Dallas. We have an author in Dallas we don't publish that we love. Her name is Heather Harper Ellett. She's a therapist. She's a clinical therapist. And so we said, Heather, would you do an event about mental health and the arts right now? Because people need it. So we did it. We organized a discussion between her and a couple other panelists about like tactics and techniques and coping mechanisms to help artists and literary artists and just anybody who wanted to attend. And then we started archiving them and saving them. We'd never done this before, but this was in the original business plan of Deep Vellum in 2012 that I wrote. I said, we have to digitize everything so that people can discover it in 100 years. And so that not every event, and of course we never did it. It wasn't like someone was setting up a webcam at every event, unfortunately, but now we've got like 25 events that we have in this archive that we can start showing what we do. And there are events that aren't related to book sales. And they're all related to the community aspect. And we would get attendees from all over the world, from like 10 different time zones. We're coming to watch discussions between a Dallas author and someone in New York. That's amazing. Whereas before it was all limited by geography, by accessibility to the event. And all of a sudden you're opening things up. And so trying to figure it out on the fly while the fear was there. And every day I was like, people were ordering books on our website and I was coming in the store before the kids woke up, fulfilling orders, going home, taking care of the kids while my wife worked. And then at night trying to catch up on my emails. You know what I mean? It was like, what a mess, what a mess. But then I got to say, networks and community are what it's all about. And so my mother-in-law, living alone in a small town in West Texas, was really depressed, you know, in lockdown. She was so sad. She's like, can I come into your bubble and just live with you guys? I'll help with childcare. And we're like, yes. And you want to talk about that is the dream, man. You got multi-generations in one house, the community, our network, and like, that's all about resiliency. And so bringing it back to the previous question, and that's sort of the fear of the time and how we came out of it. But those first 2 months was just like, every day was something new to learn that we ended up putting in place the rest of the year and we're still using today.
Thank you, Will. Roswell, what about you? What did the situation unfurling look like kind of from your angle?
You know, similar to Will, I remember thinking, oh my God, how do you do community engagement? You know, which is what I do. How do you do that in a pandemic and I can't talk to people and meet with people? It was the strangest thing how it unfolded, because I was like, oh God, I'm not going to have a job. How do I justify what I do? And North Texas Cares, which is this huge pool of money from 40 plus funders, had really started. And I started kind of making some noise about, I wanted to make sure that our smaller nonprofits were getting recognized, because what I noticed is a lot of the larger nonprofits were able to, mobilize their marketing teams and their networks of their boards of, affluence. And so they were able to immediately get resources where a lot of our smaller nonprofits and grassroots nonprofits were not in that situation. They didn't have those networks. They didn't have access to those circles of influence. And so for me, it was, I needed to make sure that they were at the table. One of our councilmen, Councilman Adam Magoo, had been assigned by the mayor to do this social services committee. And the city of Dallas was compiling a list of nonprofits. And so I started saying to them, I'm really concerned because, again, the usual suspects, and no disrespect to those nonprofits, but those are the people that were always on those lists. And so I started collating a list. And what came out of that was this amazing lady by the name of Julie Morris partnered with me. And I was like, I need to do a website that has all of these nonprofits that are led by people of color that are in these communities frontline doing the work. And initially it started off being kind of DFW wide. And then we ended up building Serve South Dallas. And this website, has it broken down by geography and looks at our Southern Dallas organizations. But in addition to that, it has it broken down by, areas of focus. And the whole goal was to say to funders, these groups exist and I need you to pay attention to them. And so during that time, I was probably working even more and I didn't think that was possible, but I was able to do a lot on Zoom and coordinating our folks. And one of the things that happened that you've been a part of is that our nonprofits were coming to me asking for resources. Hey, I need diapers. I need, to be able to get people X. And I was, calling different groups and trying to get in. And finally, I said, I'm going to have to bring you all together because one of the things that I do a lot in my department is convening. I'm really big on helping nonprofits build social capital. And so out of that, we started meeting, several times a month, just talking. And it was amazing to see sometimes up to like 40 nonprofit organizations getting on a call and going, hey, I need computers. And another nonprofit would say, oh, come meet us. We can do this. Or we're having this event and we need volunteers. And what is amazing is we're still doing those calls a year plus later, where nonprofits are getting on and sharing resources. So for me, it was really about this time of how do you identify the existing assets that are available and how do we mobilize those assets to really help, a community that doesn't always get recognition. For the fair, it was one of those things where we really, couldn't have an event. And so there's that piece of